Okay, everybody, thank you for coming back to the Xanadu Review. I'm your host, Prester John Anders, and as always, you can just call me PJ. So today we have a guest who goes by the name of Sam Colt, and he's here on Substack, and kind of covers things from culture to politics, modern events, kind of a potpourri of interesting takes. So, Sam, I'd like to say thank you for doing the show, and if you want to tell the audience a little bit more about yourself and your beat, and we'll get into it.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. I've been a long time listener of the pod, and you've had a wide range of writers whose work I respect. So thanks for having me on. And as for me, I'd like to think of my newsletter as sort of like a mix of like observational humor, and then like I guess like a little bit more of like culture writing, and I guess like now more so these days, like getting more into like kind of movie and music and quarterly book reviews. So just kind of a mix of like I guess a sort of broadly like slice of life sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that feels like I kind of made the change a little while back myself. For like I tried to do like politics and current events, but it was bumming me out too much. I felt like I can deal with these issues obliquely through media or something like that, and it feels like it's kind of you get that little layer of distance between yourself and the soul crushingness, which I think helps in my case at least.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was feeling that way for a while just because like I studied politics in grad school, and I also went to journalism school, so you kind of get and they really like drill into your head of like you always got to follow the news, like it's part of your civic duty. And I think that was maybe good advice for like an older media environment, but now with like the
Pre-internet,
internet,
maybe.
yeah, or
Okay.
especially with like the social media and streaming and all that stuff, and like I just don't know how you could keep up with daily events like that and not just slowly drive yourself insane. And I'm not saying it from a place of judgment. Like I was that guy to a degree. And it
No,
really took
me
till
too.
like it took like really kind of COVID for me to sort of snap out of it.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a bifurcation that a lot of people had. They like doubled down and became even weirder. A lot of people just kind of checked out. But I do I see like in concept that it would be a good idea, right, to try to keep up with all this stuff. But I feel like it's a lot harder, like you said, for like just the technology reasons. Because I know so many people who said like, oh yeah, I still have Twitter or X because it's a good way to keep up with the news. But like to a certain degree, yeah. But I also do, ironically, it kind of makes me more because people like will shit on what do you call it, legacy media quite a bit these days, and I think not without good reason to a certain degree. But that having been said, like the idea of like not necessarily being super reactive right on top of whatever the hottest thing to come out is, like to give it a day that you have to physically like fact check it, physically print it, all that stuff that I'm not sure if it's a better information environment, you know.
Yeah. Have you read the book Chaos Machine?
No, it's about.
So it's a New York Times foreign policy correspondent. And so essentially he traces the Malaysian genocide, which I believe he covered firsthand, all the way to Gamergate.
Mhm.
And really, like one of the things he like touches on really is sort of like the idea of like the illusory truth effect, which I guess is like a form of confirmation bias. And he says like it's paradoxical that you would think with more information you're more informed, but with the illusory truth effect, your brain takes mental shortcuts and prioritizes information based on premises that you already assume to be true, and it's much easier for you to like kind of discount things that contradict your worldview when you're kind of just overwhelmed with all this information coming in. So it's an interesting way of just like how more information can also just kind of like, and even like curiosity could also just make you curious about the things you already wanted to believe to be true, and kind of make you more incurious about things that kind of refute things you already assumed to be true about the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a confirmation bias machine. I felt myself it's very easy to fall into those spaces, especially online. Even, obviously we're talking about the socio-political economic that kind of angle, but you can also even do like the cultural angle, and you just can hear like the same things over and over again. And I think it could be very damaging. B is just kind of ends up making for boring content. Like if you want to hear the same thing, your same opinion repeated back to you over and over again ad nauseum. There's a peg for every hole, right? I try to avoid that as much as I can with what I do and have like diverse, not Amazon HR diversity, like ideological, which also kind of tracks to Amazon HR diversity, people on who have different things to say. But even still, I think like, the heterodox thing is its own trap.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's just like what happens in like a modern media environment where you kind of subject news and commentary to sort of like market and brand logic where,
Hmm.
if I ask you to describe an NPR listener or I ask you to describe a Fox News watcher, like you could probably describe like a very specific type of person. And that's not a
Hmm.
coincidence. Like that's a product of branding and market strategy and audience segmentation. And so when you have that, the news ceases to be a form of information and truth seeking and more of delivering on a brand promise. And what makes a brand good is its consistency, it's its reliability, it's your faith that it's never really going to deviate from the thing it promises you. So like, if something happens, you could pretty generally predict like what Ben Shapiro is going to say about it or Ezra
Hmm.
Klein is going to say about it, right? Like they're not like they're servicing a market, and it's not to say that like I don't, I do think that like Ben Shapiro is like genuinely conservative and Ezra's genuinely liberal, but at the end of the day,
Hmm.
like it's just become a job for them, right? So they're just servicing that niche. So it's not to say that like what they're saying is like 100% false all the time, but you kind of have to when you understand it through that context, it sort of helps you kind of take what they're saying with a grain of salt, sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most charitable interpretation of the term media literacy is
Yeah.
understanding like the meta context. And I think we're probably about the same age. Did you ever play like the old Pokemon Red and Blue games?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I remember. I forget which gym it was, but one of them had like the puzzle was like it's an invisible maze, and you kind of have to like bump up against the walls and see like
Yeah. The
you'll
the
get
saffron
context
gem.
clues. Yeah, no, it wasn't. No,
Was
Saffron was the psychic one. That was
Oh
Fuchsia.
no, the grass
The
one. Sorry. Yeah, where it's
uh-huh.
like it's like the black floor and you have to like
Yeah.
walk or yeah, yeah.
Point being, that specific detail doesn't matter, but I think it does. It's something I've kind of been like toying with, using that as a metaphor to write about like information literacy. But at the same time, like I feel like I don't know. There was like the moment, kind of like when I first got on Substack. I think it was like early 2024 or whatever it was. That like the heterodox thing was big, and I think there's maybe a small market of people who want something that's not easily in camp A or camp B, red team, blue team. But I think A, like that's its own kind of ideological trap. B, I think that's a pretty small market, all things considered. And I think I don't know, because I think we're about the same size accounts, more or less. Do you ever feel that as a writer on Substack, like and I will maybe not try to get into too much inside baseball, but like the back and forth, but that conversation between like audience capture and doing what the audience expects and trying to be not exactly doing exactly what is expected of you, just for marketing reasons, like you said, but at the same time, realizing like if you're trying to write even semi-professionally or just as a hobby, like you kind of have to have a discipline with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think like more broadly that kind of comes with like the conversation of art and commercialism, right? Where if you have any sort of commercial aspirations, and for our Substacks, like it could be even just like getting like 10,000 subs or something like that. Like you are
Mhm.
going to have to make some compromises, right? Like it's very rarely do you ever get to, I think, have like completely uninhibited sort of like artistic expression. So I don't know. At least for me, I always try to, um, you know, like I'm not going to pretend like I'm not balanced or I'm not biased and I don't have like my own political biases. Like I'm on the left. I was like a Bernie guy,
Mhm.
but I do. I'm not like also oblivious to a lot of the sort of like cultural pathologies that I find particularly like grating with the left, and what I would say is like probably like counterproductive or making people like terrible advocates for their ideas. So, I'm not afraid of like pulling punches and like calling that stuff out, but I do it from a point of like, I want these ideas to succeed. So I want to see like the best representation of those things. And, I think like there's been times where some of my audience I've lost subscribers to it. Like I remember
Mhm.
writing a series, I think in like, it would have been like 2024, where I was kind of doing a series about um, like how I don't really think like truth is objective, or like what we define as objective truth is really just mainstream consensus a lot of the times. And a
Mhm.
lot of my piece was talking about how like, the Republican Party grift is pretty overt, but like the Democratic Party grift like also has a little bit more of an opaque grift. I think is starting to be revealed, where it's like, oh well, of course we believe in free healthcare, but like we need like 80 senators to like get it passed, so like that sort of thing. So it's always these kind of like whataboutisms to sort of justify their own inaction. And so, and even with just like that, Russiagate, all this stuff, where, I was trying to provide examples of like, hey, like liberals are also just as guilty of like being propagandized too, and, falling into groupthink and all of this stuff. And, and I got like some pushback from my audience on that, but it's like, if you want me to be team blue and just never criticize the left, then like, there's plenty of like I said before, like there's plenty of other substacks that service that market.
Mhm.
You can read them, but like I just,
Yeah, Ezra
that's a
Klein or whomever.
yeah, exactly. And it's just, yeah, I might like sacrifice some growth for that, but I would rather, keep the integrity of my soul intact. And I think that's also part of the reason why I kind of shied away from politics too. I mean, part of it was the Charlie Kirk aftermath and all that stuff too, but it kind of just felt like I was writing the same stuff over and over again. And I've written a bunch of like series over the years where I feel like I've said everything I need to said about this current dynamic. So like unless it like really changes, like what am I going to write about? Like, hey, the Iran war is bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, hey, Donald Trump's an asshole. Okay, like you know what I mean? Like it's just I don't really see the point doing it anymore unless I have like something I really need to get off my chest.
Yeah. Or, if you're making the Ezra Klein money, right? Because hey, if I were making like some of those top tier guys the money they make, yeah, sure, I'll talk about whatever it is all day. Iran will go blow by blow on the peace treaty, which hopefully by the time this is released, they've sorted out. Fingers crossed. Don't have high hopes. Um, but so I'm curious. Remind me. I've read a good chunk of your work on and off over last year, over a year or so that we've been mutuals. You said you had a background in like going to school for journalism? Do you also do marketing stuff? Is that correct?
Yeah, I fell into advertising. So, well, I did my undergrad in journalism, and then I did my grad program in they called it strategic public relations, but I did like my thesis on like political campaign management. I wanted to be a little do-gooder and make a difference in the world, and I graduated right in time for the 2016 election. And I know it's a surprise to many, seeing as how inspirational Hillary and Donald Trump were as candidates, but
Mhm.
did not want to work for either one of them.
Historic.
Yeah, yeah. So I kind of just fell into PR and advertising, and I think like it's weird because going through that whole career, like I do really see the difference, or sorry, not the difference, the similarities in like brand building for like a company and brand building for like a politician or a party. And even I think like Charlie Kirk wrote it in one of his books, where he really just sees politics as a sales funnel. And so it's kind of tuned me into sort of like how certain arguments are framed, like snuck premises, like that kind of stuff. And like even just kind of passively like watching like online debate culture and all that stuff and all of that. So there's a lot of similarities between the two.
Mhm. Yeah. So, out of curiosity, what is the world of like advertising and PR like these days? Since I'm a big Mad Men enjoyer, and probably not so much like that anymore. But what's that like, especially like in the internet, like even like post Trump weird internet world with AI and everything? What's the vibe like now?
It's kind of funny because I also love Mad Men, and I rewatched it with my partner last year, and it was very jarring to me how in a lot of ways like the agency model has evolved very
Mhm.
little. Like you still got your accounts department, you still got your creatives, all the like media buys. I mean, obviously, like you now have a social team and like an influencer outreach team and all that stuff. But I would say like the main difference is like really in the show. Creative really drove the agency, and like it's kind of like and like the creative talent was like the sales pitch, whereas now uh, it's really it's really an account services profession first and foremost. Like a lot of my job is really trying to like kind of play politics with the client, understand their business challenges, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I think a lot of frustration, especially with the AI stuff, is that like we deal with a lot of like MBA and consultant types who just kind of like data optimize like any sort of humanity out of, and I'm sure, and like obviously like advertising is not alone in this. Like you could see it in like Netflix shows and all that stuff, but
Hmm.
you know a lot of you see a lot of these kind of consultant types assume that like data is objective and can't be manipulated anyways, and they're very happy to like outsource any sort of like value judgment to just like here's what the numbers say. Well, it's like, well, the numbers by definition can only measure what's ever been done, not what people could
Hmm.
like, sort of thing. So there's that kind of level of like creative restriction for a lot of clients, and I think like the number of clients that are willing to kind of do like bold and exciting work, at least on a big stage, is kind of getting smaller, but you see it a lot more in challenger brands. So like Liquid Death would be like a big one where like they're actually doing like interesting ads, or at least or at least they have some ambition to like to actually have a brand personality. So you find it a lot more in like either challenger brands, even like nonprofit spaces. I find like they're you know they're restricted by budget a lot of times, but they are aware that you know no one's going to care about like sick kids as much as McDonald's, so, or Coke or
Hmm.
something. So you know you see a lot of like really awesome sick kid like fundraising campaigns because like they're willing to do that because they're like we want people to care about like a topic that is not necessarily like on top of people's minds all the time.
I guess I'm curious about a lot of things in the advertising world. Um, First and foremost, being like, is AI getting pushed really hard for you guys since it's been, especially in like the last couple months, like the AI type speech is incredibly noticeable in ads.
Yeah.
Is it is like a hardcore push? Since I work in the tech world and like it's getting pushed really hard. But my wife is kind of in betwixt the two of us, so to speak, since she has like a marketing and journalism degree and background and ended up falling into like tech marketing. And she was, telling me about this study that she was looking at how like it's getting pushed, really, really hard. And like CEOs are like super, super confident about it. But if you like ask them for details of like how it's actually going to help, they have less information. And the farther down you go in the totem pole, the less sure people are. But the whole like like the $1 trillion IPO for SpaceX and all these different things, like the whole putting all of our economic eggs in one basket, so to speak. That aside, like what does it look like in the marketing world?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's like what you said. I feel like a lot of it is CEOs trying to justify the amount of money that they spent on it, when it's also funny that some of these companies are starting to realize that the AI spend, like once it's no longer subsidized by private equity, is actually
Mhm.
more expensive than human labor. But
And the
at least,
taxpayer.
yeah, so at least for advertising, so a lot of the industry now is pretty much dominated by an oligopoly. So there's three major holding companies. So there's WPP, there's Omnicom, which just bought IPG, and then which is who I work for, and then or I work for a company within their family, and then the last one is Publicis. So they, because like they did all these mergers, they just gutted a lot of their workforce, and they under the assumption like, oh yeah, AI will pick up the slack. At least in my company it hasn't been pushed super hard. I mean, I use it just because I'm not precious about like my advertising copywriting, just because the way I look at it, like it's
Mhm.
already compromised in so many different
Mhm.
ways, like I have to go through so many layers and all that stuff.
Yeah,
And
I'm aggressively ambivalent about it myself. I mean, I work in the tech world. It's some people are very like Luddite about it. I understand in some cases, but like me, I don't have super strong feelings about it.
yeah, because yeah, the way I look at it is like the company, like when a company is contracting me, like they're paying me to solve business challenges. They're not paying me to write like an art house film for their commercial, right? Like, so I
Hmm.
don't look at it as, at least in that context, like I don't use it for my personal Substack, but at
Hmm.
least for me, I try to at least like I'm very wary of like those studies where it's like, using AI will like, atrophy like your critical thinking and all that stuff. So, an example of like how I would use it is like, let's say I'm writing a white paper and it's gone through like 5 rounds of revisions. And I have to like meet a tight deadline. And it's like I've looked at this thing so many times that I've lost like all sense of objectivity of like how I could do this. So, if one of their feedback is like, trim this by like 300 words, I would just cut and paste like a section in and just be like, highlight where there's any potential repetition and give me like 5 suggested edits. So at least I prompt it in the way where it's like I'm still making the judgment call. And like I also specifically like
Hmm.
tell it like, do not make any edits, just highlight the text. So like when you give it like really specific prompts in like in certain contexts like that, it's decently useful. And like the way I look at it is like, is it really that different from a graphic designer using generative fill? Like I don't know. So that's kind of
No,
just where I'm at.
yeah, it's I don't know. It's degrees, right? With any of this stuff, like it's super useful for me. At work since I'm like mid-level tech guy, sysadmin, network engineer type thing. So if I need like, oh wow, I've one of the locations that I manage has a printer from like 2004 and it's not working. I gotta go find. I don't have to put, spend 3 hours combing through documentation. Like, all right, go find the driver for me on some like defunct forum or something like that. For that, it's great. But yeah, it's one of those things where like people get so up in arms about it that like it's very I'm hesitant to even talk about it just because like, I don't have super strong feelings about it, but it's definitely it feels very noticeable in the advertising world is why I asked. Like the generative AI videos were like I've sometimes said it's kind of like having a Diet Coke or something like that, where it's
Yeah.
almost there, but you still get that aspartame taste, and I'm
Yeah.
startled to like it was so quick within like 6 months.
No, and I think the reason why like, I've used it and like part of it is sort of just like professional self-preservation, but the other part of it is like, these tools are here, companies are sinking in tons of money into it. Like, I do think that like AI is a bubble. How much of that's going to crash? I don't know. Like I still assume that AI will still be around in some form, maybe not like as ubiquitous as it is right now, but I think the reason why you like exactly what you said, whereas I would rather creatives be at least like conversant in the strengths and weaknesses of these tools. So then at least we can have a say in how these things are being used. Because if we don't, then like some consultant will tell us, and or people who are completely detached from the creative process are going to just say like, oh well, this thing could cut like just write a script for me, and it's like, yeah, I can do that, it's going to be garbage, but like sure. And I think like
Mhm.
companies that are willing to do that kind of creative were companies that never really valued creative in to begin with, which like I think that was really more of the threat with AI was just kind of
Yeah,
the general trend of enshittification where it's not like I was never worried that like an AI could outright me, but I was worried that someone in management thinks that they could do that AI could, or people who
yeah,
like genuinely and that's also like the concern is like the general artistic illiteracy in the public, right? Where it's not that I think like people necessarily want bad art all the time. I think it's just we've kind of devalued like humanities as an education
yeah,
system. So like people just don't know like there's like a lot of people, especially like when you're just scrolling through social media, like AI is good for like if you're not paying attention to the details of something, like yeah, like who cares if a person has 6 fingers if you're just scrolling through like once like every 2 seconds. But um
hmm.
yeah, it's
Again, I was just gonna say it's degrees. Like, um, it, there's definitely some jobs that I think it'll. I mean, there's like there's the conversation of like the bubble and the business around it and everything, and there's the technology. Those are two separate things. Which this isn't a technology podcast per se, um, but I don't. And again, it always kind of like, and this is something that some people I know definitely disagree with very strongly. Like I know, there's this, I forget his name. There's like a content creator on YouTube I like. He's like an Italian guy who makes great Italian food and does great cinematography. It's like, very obvious AI scripts that makes him for him, but like this guy's a chef and a cinematographer. English is not his first language. It's, the YouTube short 30-second clips that doesn't even come close to bothering me. But I think the kind of you hit the nail on the head that the other thing that makes me think of, I remember I was doing some volunteer work recently, and I was in like the break room there, and some lady was listening to like AI generated script, AI voice to text of like Harry Potter lore. And I think most people like they just want I don't want to be derisive because I enjoy my slop, but it's slop.
Yeah.
I have a different type of slop, but I think that's just gonna kind of win out in the end, unfortunately, or fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it. It's kind of like I was talking to Peter Banks recently, and to me, it sometimes feels like people who are mad at autotune, like there's still some people who are mad at autotune, but autotune is pretty handily won out, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's tough because like autotune, I feel like is, I mean, yeah, it could be used poorly, but like, I think of someone like T-Pain where he uses autotune, but like he is a legitimately talented singer without autotune.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I don't know. It's weird because I guess where I feel strongly about AI is the idea, like if it's going to be used as like a tool, that's one thing. Like I know there was like a headline of like Ben Affleck investing in AI and he got blowback from it, but then when I actually read the article, like it was really just about like sussing out like shots and like helping, like I think it was like streamlining, like finding like or like organizing like camera footage. I think so. If it's something like
Mhm.
that, like I'm not opposed to something like that, but I think it's just the idea that like like Suno AI, where it's like I don't need to, like where the CEO came out, was just like I think people don't actually like making music and don't want to go through the process of like getting
Mhm.
good at guitar so they could do AI instead. Where like I think that's to me where I have issues
Mhm.
with AI, where it's like if you don't want to go through the effort of learning an instrument or learning, like some degree of like reading music or music theory, like then you shouldn't be making music. And chances are you're probably not going to make anything that's like worth listening to,
Yeah.
right? So,
Probably. I mean, just to play devil's advocate, it feels very similar to like what people were saying about like synthesizers and electronic music not that long ago. And if you're going to use like auto tune, T Pain, what have you, you have your T Pains, your Bon Ivers, your Kanye West, the artist, not Kanye West, that
yeah,
whole thing. People who use or like sampling, people use it in a way that's creative, and people use it. There's the Black Eyed Peas, for example. Because at least for me, I was looking into, I forget what the service is. I haven't followed up on it. Like, I forget. I love the idea of like, because you can kind of see I have a couple
yeah,
guitars laying around. Um, I would love the ability, and I think this is something that exists. I looked into it. Like you can like let me play. Here's my song on acoustic guitar. What would this sound like with a full band? I would love that for my personal use. I would love it. I wouldn't put it out and pretend that like, oh, this is me and my band. That's a separate
yeah,
thing. But that'd be like as a musician, some of it is exciting for like a new tool in the toolkit. Um, but again, I think that it gets into the interesting conversation about like humanity and music. And I think actually segues well into some of the other things I wanted to talk to you about because you do
yep,
some really interesting arts and culture writer. Um, so recently, one of your pieces, I guess not super recently, you sent me about like the end of discourse vis-a-vis like that Sabrina Carpenter album from a little while back, and I
yeah,
think this all dovetails really well since you said something that I thought was very funny and interesting about like, people are feeling like all kinds of ways about her, but like her music itself is just kind of mediocre. And I'm not the target audience, I guess, right? Because not everything is for everybody. But she kind of like her or like Billie Eilish. When I hear their music, like I kind of agree, like they have this very edgy image, but like it's just very, very basic. It doesn't even sound that different from something that, like, again, we're probably about the same age that would have been on the radio when we were in high school. I've kind of, to me, they're like, Kiss for Zoomers, because you look at Kiss like, damn, this band's probably hardcore, but then it's like a Boston B side when you listen to most of their music. Um, so yeah, what are your thoughts? What was your thought process when you were writing that?
I mean, I tried to like, yeah, I tried to draw a parallel because I think like that discourse was happening when Trump, I think, did the first, or at least the first major like ICE raid in LA. And so it was just kind of funny that I just saw like a pair. I thought that was just like kind of like the perfect encapsulation of like the culture war, where you got these groups of people that are essentially regard. And I don't dislike Sabrina Carpenter. I have no strong feelings
Mhm.
towards her music, but it's just like, guys, at the end
It's
of the day,
fine.
like you're fighting over a corporate product. Like this is no different than like fighting over like the Sydney Sweeney jeans commercial, or like the Black Little Mermaid. Like it's just it's like, guys, like it's the same song and dance. Like how have we not caught on to this already? You know,
It's grist
and
for the mill.
yeah, and so it's like you have that happening while you have an administration that is kind of doing a trial balloon for some pretty grisly like authoritarian police state stuff, and uh, and so it's just like, and like and I'm not trying to discount like obviously there was a lot of people in LA like protesting and really standing up and putting themselves on the line, and I have a lot of respect for those people, but it was just kind of seeing like this just like online discourse about all this stuff, and it was just like it, it's just like, and I have no problem with like debating over media and all this stuff, but it's just, I just find like the internet and social media has this really insidious and wildly effective means of sort of like distorting our sense of scale and really distorting our sense of priorities. And so I thought the fact that those two events kind of happen at the same time was a pretty perfect illustration of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it feels like we have just this lack of segregation. Maybe poor choice of words considering the topic, but as far as like entertainment versus politics, any of this stuff, it all becomes one kind of blob. And you've written about a little bit, and I know you're at least aware of like, the whole poptimism thing. And that's kind of,
Yeah.
it made me think of that because it was very like, let's call a horse here. I think at this point it's like a certain reactionary element who are like, I've heard it like, I don't know if you're a Chapo Trap House listener, but I think Amber
Yeah.
Frost described it as being like, being mad at your ex-boyfriend, or being mad at your dad if you're talking about how much you hate Radiohead or Steely Dan. It feels like
Yeah.
I shout out to writer Jamie Brooks, who was on the show. She wrote some great stuff, and we had a great conversation vis-a-vis the whole poptimism thing, and like what the what's the word I'm looking for, the steel man of poptimism, what it is. But in practice, that's kind of what it ended up being like to me. Um, because like, no, you weren't seeing like Bon Jovi or Limp Bizkit get a critical reevaluation. And I feel like these things feel kind of connected to me. It's like, you can't, in a lot of cases, like you said, there are people who will protest. The degree to which it is effective is debatable. Um, but you can't deal with that, but you can get mad about people not liking Taylor Swift or Beyonce or whatever, or that they're
Yeah.
forced on you, quote unquote.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of it is just kind of like reacting to like stan culture and a lot of that. So like, my partner, for example, like she's a big Swiftie, and
Mhm.
so I wasn't a fan of Taylor Swift's like last few albums, and she was just like, oh well, like you dislike Taylor Swift, and I'll say someone who has she's prodded me to listen to her entire discography. Like she does have some like legitimately good albums to her name, but I don't dislike Taylor Swift's music. I dislike Taylor Swift fandom, and those things certainly overlap because her fandom will tend to like vastly overrate her music, at least in my opinion. And and you know, and I'll also be fair, like I don't think Taylor Swift fandom is inherently any more toxic than like like the Beehive, or even like, you know, the worst of like Radiohead fans or anything like that, or even like Rick and Morty fans. It's just Taylor Swift's fandom in this moment just happens to be the most ubiquitous. You just hear about it the most. But
Mhm.
you know, I just like I have a universal, like I just think fandom, and especially online fandom, is generally like fairly toxic. Like, I think there's a difference between, you know, respecting and admiring someone's work and then just like, you know, hardcore fan culture. I want to distinguish between those two things.
Yeah, it almost feels quasi-religious. I'll quote Amber Frost again. She's like, something to the effect of, you don't see cults as much as you used to because the type of people who would join a cult, 30, 40 years ago are just Marvel fans now. Um, but I
Yeah.
think that's a good point. You do see, I don't it sometimes it seems strange to me. Once again, like I'm an admitted unreconstructed rockist, I suppose you could say, if we want to use those terms, or at the very least, like I'm a 34-year-old boomer. Like I like pop music, but I basically stopped listening to new music in 2014. I have zero plans to really change that. Not because I'm like, oh fuck the Zoomers, and they're. It's like I just don't keep up with it. I'm still very
There's a study that proved that actually, which was kind of
that
funny.
what the
Yeah,
music stopped. It actually peaked when I was a teenager.
no, it was so the New York Times came out with a study and they said or the average age of when you become less receptive to new music is around 28 years old. And so if you're 34, like 2014 might not be that far. And it's kind of funny because when I was reading that, I think I was like maybe like 25 or 26, and I was like, I'm never going to be that person. I love discovering new music, and now that I'm in my 30s, I'm like, I got a lot less free time. You know, it's not that I'm not receptive to new music, but I am much more selective as to like
Yeah.
what artists I give a chance to, sort of thing.
Do you feel it even hits you in the same way? Since like when I was talking to Jamie Brooks, that's a conversation I had that like the Smashing Pumpkins is one of my favorite bands of all time.
Oh hell yeah.
And I'll listen to their new music, but like much to the chagrin of Billy Corgan, like I don't like anything he's ever done as much as Siamese Dream. And not because even like if I had never heard Smashing Pumpkins and you showed them to me today, I'd be like, okay, maybe might not like it as much. But like I first heard today, it was like, I was probably like 14, probably 15, 16. I had just gotten high for the first time and it came on like VH1 or whatever. And it was like nothing I'd ever heard before. So like
Yeah.
not only will like no music that Billy Corgan ever makes be as good as that was to me, no music that anybody makes is going to be as good
Yeah.
as that was to me. But I don't know. Once again, I'm not like, man, I'm exaggerating. There is new music that I like. But I just like maybe it is that brain chemistry thing. Like I'm trying to think of like the last time a new artist or a new song was like it hit me in the same way as when I was like, a teenager, early 20s.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I would be inclined to say that Siamese Dream is Smashing Pumpkins'
Mhm.
best album, or at least my
Most
favorite.
would, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I don't know. I think what you're describing, I mean, that's kind of like the subjectivity of like all of art, right? Is that it kind of invokes a certain feeling from with you because it hits you at a certain point in your life or in a certain like mental or emotional state that, you know, isn't always going to be replicated, right? So like anytime you hear today, your mind's going to go back to that. So that's why it has like a special significance to you that, you know, another song may or may not have. So I think it's pretty normal. Like I remember I read a Jeff Tweedy book and he wrote about like just kind of the songs that really shaped him. And what was interesting about it is like a lot of times like he didn't really talk about like the technical aspects of the songs. He just talked about like when he heard them and like it was like the story of like when he heard them and it left like a mark on his life and it left like a really emotional impact on it. So that's what I thought was like kind of interesting about that book. And so I think that's just like a lot of people's relationship to me. So like even like more casual Spotify listeners, like they just want like some funky, fun music to put in the background while they're cooking food, or you know they want some like fun kind of country tune to play while they're on a road trip. Like it's and I think people who are more into music still like want the album experience, but it's still kind of like that same desire, right?
Hmm. And that's kind of, I don't know. And I really, because we probably both grew up in like the tail end of the hipster era, because I think it was more of like a late 90s, 2000s, very early 2010s was kind of, it was
Yeah.
on its way out. Because I'm very like anti-hipster, because I like a lot of like, obscure music, but I also like unironically really like Creed. I guess the songs I know by them I like. I'm not gonna sound
Yeah.
like I'm a big Creed fan, but I'm also not gonna like perform it. No, I will say I unironically love new metal. That was like the what got me
Oh,
into music. New
hey
metal
man.
rules.
I think like most angsty suburban white kids, like
Uh,
we all like Corn, or at least a lot of us like
mhm,
Corn and Limp Bizkit and Linkin Park. Like
mhm.
I'm not gonna pretend like I was above that. I listen to all that
The
stuff.
production is, I think, has aged phenomenally well. Maybe not the content, but like I think overwhelmingly, like new metal was like phenomenally produced. It sounds great even today, I would say.
Yeah.
Um, but where I was going with that is like, I do think that, people want different things out of music, and that's fine, right? I sometimes I will much more rarely today. Like even I have a vinyl collection, but most of the time when I listen to music, I'm in the car or at work. It's much rarer that I'll just like throw on an actual album just to listen to these days. But I do kind of feel like something has been lost in music culture, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are. I don't know if it's the internet, or I feel like poptimism is like a symptom because it became like this again, like this weird semi-populist, semi kind of like weird reactionary thing. Some like partially like you know young women, or and partially like middle-aged white guys who like seeming like they're trying to like hold on to their positions or
Yeah.
something like that. But I do kind of miss the hipster era, that having been said, because there was like a care and attention to music that like I don't know. I don't. Is this just nostalgia? What do you think? Is it categorically different now?
No, I would say, yeah, I agree. I mean, yeah, I would say poptimism is probably like a symptom of like what we were talking about before with like fan culture and even like just like the streaming era where I think I don't know, like I was always kind of skeptical of like kind of like the premise of poptimism because like yeah, there's definitely like a hipster snob like archetype. I would say like specifically Pitchfork, where they would go in the other direction and say like anything mainstream is bad, which that's not a take I agree with. There's
Mhm.
plenty of mainstream artists I think are great and worth listening to, but I don't know, like but like the idea where poptimism was saying like, oh, pop music isn't like culturally taken seriously or critically taken seriously. Like, I mean, yeah, there's probably like certain cases where you could point to that and it's true, but like for as long as I've ever been alive, like Michael Jackson's Thriller or like Prince or like
Yeah,
Madonna
I
have
always thought it
always
was
been
a
like well
flawed
respected.
premise too.
Yeah, I was like for
Especially
as long.
like I feel like I remember watching some old documentary where like John Lennon was like, "Oh yeah, the rock music today is terrible. The real stuff was like, the black guys from the 50s." And like the whole premise it was like, "Oh, it's just these white men who didn't want to listen to, didn't want to." I felt like that definitely that was there. I don't want to be one of those guys who totally underplays it, but at the same time like I feel like it was a premise that was kind of overstated, especially considering like, most of these people would turn their nose up at again, I one time looked like what are the top it was like the top 10 or 15 best selling rock bands of all time. Um, and it was like Nirvana, the Beatles kind of, and Pink Floyd, who of the top 15 who actually like were liked by the critics. Otherwise it was like, Metallica and Guns N' Roses and all these bands that were like, getting savaged and still get savaged critically to this day. Kiss is another band that I like that is, lowbrow, and like they all want to talk about like Etta James or Billie Holiday, which are phenomenal by the way.
Yeah,
But
I
I feel
agree.
like it was kind of a flawed premise to begin with, at least as far as like that discourse went. It felt very artificial.
Yeah, no, I agree, and that's because I think like you could point to certain like I know like the Abbey Road by the Beatles was not did not get the reception that it did today back when it was released. So I think like yeah, you could probably point to like specific cases where pop artists by virtue of being mainstream were not taken seriously. Like I don't want to discount that, but I think it's just
Mhm.
yeah, the idea that like pop culture writ large or pop music writ large was never critically taken seriously before poptimism. I think it's a claim that's a little more dubious than poptimists would argue, but even then, I still think the I would say like initially it had some noble goals where um like there was a lot of like black artists that probably didn't get the recognition that they deserved at the time and are getting critically evaluated, and by doing that that kind of like expands the canon, which I think is a good thing. I think having more diversity in representation, like within, like what's considered classic, I think changes. I think it expands our imagination, expands like what we consider to be good, and expands our possibilities for art. I think that's all a good thing. But then I think where it kind of turned and became a little excessive was when it was just really this assertion that like if something is making a political statement or a social statement, like it is that piece of art is therefore good, and I don't think that's necessarily true. Or
Mhm.
the idea that like because something is pop I have to analyze it as if it's high art, which is just like it's just kind of ridiculous because like a pop song can just be a pop song and still be good. Like like Michael Jackson's Thriller wasn't trying to heal America, it didn't stop it from being an amazing pop album. So I
Mhm.
think it was just, I feel like it was just like a lot of kind of like people trying to like shoehorn their sort of like culture war brand of politics into their analysis of culture, which I think is inherently just going to kind of make your ability to engage with art like kind of blinkered and a little bit blindsided. And so it just led to like a lot of really just kind of like hacky like culture writing that like I just wasn't a fan of, because like it just got to a point where like you couldn't even really engage with like something on its own merits of like whether it tells a good story in a compelling way. It has to be about, oh well, like does it convey a message that I agree with, or like a prime example would be like David Foster Wallace discourse, where it's like, what does liking David Foster Wallace say about you? It's like, well, what about like whether the quality of his work is good or not? So that's where I just kind of would roll my eyes at that.
Yeah, there's and I've said before, I'm not a culture war slot podcast, but I do feel like there is a concerted effort I've seen in the last, 6 to 12 months to like downplay the degree to which that existed. For the whatever you want to say, like the late 2010s to the early 2020s. Um, because it was very much a thing. I think we're gonna need some historical distance to see, what it's gonna look like. But it did it made for a very frustrating time for culture. I think that's part of the reason I checked out, since I think, probably honestly, I think Eddie Michael Jackson doing Beat It and having Eddie Van Halen do the solo probably did more for race relations than This Is America did. Honestly, I'll say it.
Mhm.
Because and it's just people coming together for music. I think that's kind of finding common ground. That's what actually makes people, you know, find a common ground and get over prejudices and whatnot. But I think it's definitely something that existed, and it was strange to see. Like I remember hearing the song "Not This Is America," was it? They Not Like Us, and I was like, this. It sounds like it could be like a 2004, club rap song just from like how it sounds. But the message aside, which I understand why people like it. Um, it it felt like it was like very emblematic of like that certain time, since like you've talked about like Anthony Fantano, and like I used to watch him in like the late 2000s, early 2010s. Like him and Pitchfork are great examples of this, of like, bands in Portland that you've never heard of, to you listen to them a couple years now, it's all like, oh, Beyonce, and I think he's probably turned on Taylor Swift, but like it feels very, very inorganic.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever. Yeah, I don't know if Anthony ever rode the Taylor Swift train. He definitely rode the Beyonce train for
Mhm.
sure. Which, like, oh, Beyonce's got some pretty good albums. I
Mhm.
mean, I wouldn't say I'm like the biggest fan of hers, but like, I think
Mhm.
she certainly has her merit as a pop artist. But yeah, I don't know. It's yeah, I think it just gets back to like the whole like branding thing, where it's like, at the end of the day, you got to appease the algorithms, you got an audience to serve, and I don't know. There's like this kind of deflating reality that like a lot of people just kind of want to just be they just want to be reaffirmed with what they already believe as opposed to like being challenged. And I don't know, I think there is going to be some sort of break. Like, I don't know if it's going to be like a wholesale rejection of like algorithm culture or anything like that. Like, I think when people say the internet is the new smoking, I really do think that it will be smoking in the sense that like cigarettes, there's going to be a core group of people that I think are just like hopelessly addicted to like that kind of like stimulus response, clickbait outrage thing, all of that.
Mhm.
And then there will be a, a break with people who just kind of view it as kind of cringe to be terminally online and try to
Mhm.
seek out human connections. What that'll look like, I don't know, but I just I don't know. Like, I think just with dead internet theory and AI just reducing a lot of things to slop, like I do think it won't be a wholesale rejection, but I do think there will be a significant block of people that kind of just sort of either detach themselves from it, like partially, or if not completely.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it goes since I keep on. It's really hard to tell because when you hear about these trends through the internet, like, oh, wow, there's a religious revival, young people are rejecting smartphones to, live connected. Like, A, I don't know if this is true. B, your methodology is obviously going to be flawed because you're basing it off of like self reported stuff online. C, like, how would you know? You'd have to like go I mean, unless you're gonna like just find random groups of 20-year-olds who are hanging out, it's hard to tell. Um,
Yeah.
but it will be interesting to see if that bifurcates. And sometimes it does feel like it's overstated. But I mean, I feel like, believe it or not, I was like never like a super online person before subs. Well, in my youth I was, and I had like 6 or 7 years where I was off, and then I got on Substack, and now I'm chasing the dragon yet again. But I'm I'm interested to see how things shake down again since it kind of like back to the beginning of the conversation when you were saying like it's kind of like when it's so low effort when I see advertising that's obviously AI generated, like, okay, you've done like the opposite of what you're trying to accomplish here because now there's nothing you could say that would make me want that product. Kind of like if somebody's lying and trying to impress you, there's nothing they could say that would impress you. And that's kind of how it feels right now with the online ecosystem where Substack is decent. It's starting to have its problems, but it's still more pool than piss, so to speak.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I know some people have issues with like Substack kind of being turning into more of like an everything app, but like I think that's just the reality of social media. Like people, a lot of the sort of like artsy writer types on Substack kind of have to come with the terms that blogs are fairly niche, and Substack still needs to make money as a company. So like I don't know. I'm not even necessarily like opposed to like short term form videos and notes and stuff like that because it's like it is still a form of writing, and like yeah, like it just depends on like how you utilize it. Like people can use these tools to make slops, and people can use these tools to make good stuff. It just kind of depends on the creator, and like I don't see Substack algorithm rewarding as much slop as other platforms do. I mean, obviously, like
Mhm.
you're gonna find it everywhere, but yeah, I would say like Substack's still like better than like Instagram or Twitter per se.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's kind of like one of the recent things that like dawned on me, like since I'm pretty new to writing. I've never really written before Substack, and um just kind of like, okay, if I want to, I'm getting a little bit of motion, I might as well try with something. You have to write regularly, and there again, it's like that's kind of what I was alluding to at the beginning. Like, I never want to do slop and like, what Dragon Ball Z tells us about
Yeah,
burnout culture. Like,
yeah,
I'm to the point now on a technical level where if I wanted to write that article, I could, but there's virtually nothing to say there. But at the same time, you still have to like realize that, treat it like a job, even if I know this is not going to be literally my full-time job, but you still have to treat it with that same discipline that you would with anything else. Um, and I wonder how that's going to look with Substack, just since, like you said, I mean, you can only change it so much before, like, at that point, like, why wouldn't people just go to Twitter? Why wouldn't they just go to TikTok? You still have to, I think, keep what makes it. And again, you're talking about brand recognition at the beginning.
Yeah.
I wonder how much you can change it before it's like, okay, well, why wouldn't I just go to TikTok? Why wouldn't I just go to, Twitter?
Yeah. No, that's true. Like, yeah, I mean, I don't, I haven't seen any of their changes so far that would ruin their core proposition. I did they walk back the whole poly market thing? Because it seems like they've that's been like de-emphasized a little bit. But
Maybe, and that's another of those things that just didn't bother me at all. It's like, oh, I'm just not going to use this feature. So
yeah,
I didn't feel super strongly about it.
no, that's the thing, and that's just like kind of where I've just landed on social media in general, where it's just kind of whatever you make of it. Like, even like with the notes, for example, like I remember back, this may have been before you joined Substack, but like it was like the whole Richard Hania, like they were hosting Nazis and stuff like that, and it
Oh
turned into
yeah.
this whole like annoying free speech debate. And I was like, well, all this debate did is just like surface up like who I just need to block. And since I've done that, like, my feeds become like a lot more tolerable and stuff like that. So, I haven't had like any major issues. Like, so yeah, like,
Do
Substack's
you
been pretty good to
mean
me. So
Richard Hanania or Richard
yeah,
Spencer?
Anania, that was it. I don't know how to
Although I
pronounce his
think
name.
Hanania used to be a white supremacist who I guess is now a super lib, which honestly, shout out to Richard for just like, if you want to be a slot merchant, that guy
Yeah.
has figured out the formula.
Yeah. Yeah. I've never really followed his work that closely. So I'm just, yeah.
Yeah, he's one of those people like I've never really read his work, but like what's that chick Ayella? Where like I've never read her work. I know people feel very strongly about her, but I'll just see like a screenshot of a tweet with like the most dog shit take you could possibly think.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like you could screenshot one of my, jokey notes that I do out of context, and maybe it's like, wow, this Prester John guy's an idiot. So, I try to be at the very least, I at some point I'm going to try to read Ayala and see what her deal is.
Yeah. I know. I remember seeing one Richard Hania tweet. It was something about how liking Sydney Sweeney's tits is gay or something. And I was just like, I don't need to engage with this. That's like,
That's
I'm
kind
good.
of yeah. I think it's funny. I think I had the exact same, and it was either that or like something about the West. I was like, all right, this guy is. I think he's just a troll and an engagement baiter. But like I said, hey, if you can make more power to you. If you can make a living that way, everybody's got to pick what their artistic line of integrity is. And for some
Yeah.
people, it's saying, it's gay. Fellas, is it gay to like women? Many people are
Yeah.
asking us.
Have you watched that Louis Theroux documentary on the Manosphere?
No, I've heard kind of mixed things about it. What's your thoughts?
Um, I think
I know the
there's
premise.
yeah,
Hmm.
I think there's parts of it that were very interesting. Like I thought the most interesting aspects of that documentary when he stopped focusing, like the subjects themselves, like they're not that interesting. They're just like kind of an
Hmm.
outgrow, like like I grew up listening to Howard Stern on the radio, and I
Hmm.
remember we're probably like around the same age, like when in high school, when the game came out, and I hope you serve beer in hell, and like all that pickup artist stuff. So like
Yeah,
I
all
just
that
view
shit.
these yeah, I just view these Manosphere guys as just kind of an outgrowth of like pickup artists and shock jock culture, just kind of, and then kind of like weirdly, I guess, tenuously grafted onto MAGA politics. And so, like when these guys
Yeah,
speak, I'm just like, there's nothing there. Like, and even like he even gets one of them to admit at one point that like he is just doing it for views. Like he doesn't actually like believe this stuff. But what I found interesting was when he was like talking to the relatives and like how like one of the guys, his mom is like a self-described feminist, and he's just like, well, how do you square your feminist beliefs with like your son saying all this stuff? And she's just like, well, he makes money, so blah blah, blah. So I thought like that part of it was interesting, but I don't know, I just find, especially with like like just even with all the punditry, it's just like these guys are just so boring. Like I don't know, like I
Yeah.
just don't find them
Well,
interesting at all.
it's a very symbiotic relationship with like, the quote unquote, like, the woke moralists, as Jordan Peterson would put it. Like without them, these guys would be nothing. Like
Yeah.
you probably remember like, the days of Milo Yiannopoulos and,
Oh yeah.
say what you will about Joe Rogan, but like he was the one who ended up taking down Milo Yiannopoulos because he was like, he just kind of let the guy talk and gave him enough rope to hang himself since, he just didn't react to the crazy shit he said. And it's like, okay. And he just had to keep on, one upping and one upping. And he went, one step too far for his conservative audience. And that kind of seems to be a lot of this stuff that like either that or the other side were like, the crazy blue-haired SJW, whatever. Like, would this exist if this were just some random lady who lived in a town without like, things to get mad on the internet? Like it
Yeah.
I do wonder, kind of like you said, is this just gonna be like the spiritual smoking section someday? That's what I hope for.
Yeah. Well, another example would be Ben Shapiro went on the BBC to like promote his book. And the funny thing about it is the guy who interviewed him is like a dyed in the wool Tory. And basically Ben writes this book about like the coarsening of political discourse, and like basically all this guy just did was just read Ben Shapiro's tweets back to him and just be like, well, you complain about the coarsening of political discourse and yet you've made a career contributing to the thing you're complaining about. And Ben's just like, I should have known that like I'm debating a leftist. He's like, this isn't a debate, I'm interviewing you. And he's just like you'll just admit you're a leftist. And he's just like it's just like it's just
Oh, I
very,
remember that one.
yeah, and
Yeah.
he's just not reacting to anything, and it just kind of shows you that like a lot of these pundits, like it even like yeah, a lot of these MAGA pundits, and I would even also say in retrospect, a lot of like the woke like cancel culture, quote unquote,
Mhm.
like it's been retrospectively kind of revealed to be a paper tiger. Like a lot of this stuff is just like really not moved the culture in any sort of meaningful way, or at least in terms of like policy. I won't say
Mhm.
culture, but yeah, in terms of like
Language
actual
for
like
sure.
material. Yeah,
Because
exactly. But in terms of material politics, it hasn't really changed much.
yeah, it to a certain degree it feels like wrestling. It's like, the Iron Sheik or Hulk Hogan, what's his face, Stone Cold Steve Austin, whomever you like. But I do think it's actually moved the culture language wise in a material way. Since I
Yeah,
was listening to, I'm trying to think of her name. It was it was an offshoot of, I think, The Hill or Breaking Points. I'm trying to think of it. Emily Jabowski, something Polish. She's from Wisconsin, so I have a pass to mispronounce her name. And she was talking about this news story where like there are these not NBA, what are the baseball guys, professional baseball players who had like they had to wear like pride colors on their hats. So one of them, like in protest, wrote a Bible verse on his hat. It was the one about like God not destroying the world through flood, and the rainbow was a signal. And say what you will, you might disagree with that. Some people might agree with it. It's pretty innocuous to me. But the interesting part was that the way she framed it, she was like, "Oh, well, now in our current left wing culture, this is they're punching down on these Christians, and I forget all the phrases she used, but it was like punching down, power dynamics, like bodies and spaces." And it's interesting the degree to which like that language has remained, and now the right is using it as well.
yeah. I'm not like a particular fan of horseshoe theory when it comes to like
Mhm.
explaining ideology. Like you'd have a very difficult time convincing me that Karl Marx and Milton Friedman have similar views on economics. But I think to someone who doesn't follow politics and kind of just sees politics filtered through the culture war, I could see why someone would be inclined to believe in horseshoe theory, because at least in terms of like behavior, a lot of these people are just kind of the same. Like they really just want, like they just want to police people's manners. They just want pop culture to propagandize to them. They want to feel like they are, the dominant trendsetters, for lack of a better word. And like, I explained to some of my friends who were getting into like the like Jordan Peterson and like Ben Shapiro back when they were like huge, and they were just like, yeah, like they're an antidote to like the like left SJWs. I'm like, well, what are these guys if not right wing SJWs? Like they kind of just like I watched a Ben Shapiro video where he spent 45 minutes complaining about Barbie, which is like a doll movie made for teenage girls that literally no one made him watch, and like he makes a video about it that's like half the length of the actual movie. So I'm like, these guys are kind of like demonstrating all the same behavior that they claim to hate about the other side, but they're so like cocooned in their echo chamber that they're like oblivious to that. So, that's why I just find it's just easier to just kind of see it for what it is and sort of just tune it out, because like it's not like you said, it's not real politics. It's just kayfabe.
Yeah, once again, I think at least to me, like the interesting part is the language, and to me that shows again, like you said, it's kayfabe. Like if the language and framing in and of itself were able to make changes, then it would. But it's just, I think it's the medium is the message, so to speak.
Yeah. No, it's at the end of the day, we're all just people with feelings. It's like,
Yeah. Well, I think we're probably coming close to the end of the time we were doing today. So, first of all, thank you for coming on the show. Do you have any closing thoughts that you want to impart on the audience?
oh God. You
Words
know,
of wisdom.
at least what I found, if you want to navigate this crazy online environment, is I know this sound very like kind of debate broy, but I find like
Mhm.
being familiarizing yourself with like logical fallacies, actually I found is like really helpful in kind of assessing kind of our media environment, and not in like in a debate bro way, but in sort of like, people ask me like, well, what news source should I trust? It's like, well, you should apply skepticism to everything. It's more of like
Mhm.
using those fallacies to fine tune your ability to assess the validity of information, knowing when someone's trying to like sell you something, know when someone's trying to frame an argument to get you to think in a certain way, I find is helpful. And in terms of like, get in touch with like culture, like add some friction to your life, like if you find a song, like seek out the album, even if you don't want to buy a vinyl or sort of vinyl collection, just like listen to the whole album on Spotify, like read a book, go out for a walk. Like I just think like, or I'm concerned with how willing a lot of people are trying to like that are willing to cede their taste in like critical thinking to algorithms instead of like kind of forming their own thoughts. And even like, back when I was more online, like I was guilty of it, and like I didn't even realize like how many opinions and takes I like thoughtlessly absorbed and parroted until like I took like a 2 or 3 month detox of social media, and I was like, oh wow, I feel like I got my mind back, and
Mhm.
so I think that overcorrection allowed me to have a little bit more of a healthy relationship with social media that I didn't have before. So I would say like those things have been like kind of beneficial to sort of like my mental health and my outlook on life, and all of that. So I recommend that. At least it worked for me, so hopefully it works for other people.
I think that's great advice. So second to last question, do you want to have any plugs or promotions? I'd subscribe to Sam if you were not, but anything else aside from that?
No, I mean, yeah, it's just my newsletter. It's just this is a newsletter.
Mhm.
I was high one night and couldn't think of a better name and just kind of stuck. There's that, and then I'm also Sam Colt on Letterboxd if you want to see my thoughts on movies. But that's more or less about the extent of my social
Mhm.
media. I mean, I have a Reddit account, but you don't need to follow me on that. I mostly just lurk.
Yeah, no, I think it's very succinct and to the point. It could be worse. You could come up with a name, then 2.5 years later, you're going by the name of some medieval Christian king that's a legend, and then it's too late to change it. Um, but I'll go ahead and then, as a closing question, I'll ask you the final question I always ask all my guests. So, what is something that makes you feel hopeful for the future?
Actually seeing Obsession and Backrooms smoke that new Star Wars movie, because I think there was a point in time where like Star Wars was like like an amazing trilogy, like it was a really groundbreaking set of films in a lot of ways, but then I think as soon as like I think you're a Star Wars fan, right?
Mhm.
Were you a fan of like the J.J. Abrams like sort of thing?
No, no, we'd have to talk another 2 hours
Yeah.
to get in to unpack all that. But no,
Yeah,
not a big fan of
but
sequels.
yeah, I feel like Disney taking over it is kind of, if you want like an example of kind of like media and shitification, I think it's just like, they took all the artistic merit out of Star Wars and sort of just turned it into like, like this IP cash grab sort of thing. So I think, seeing Obsession and seeing Backrooms, like, like these like just original stories just kind of smoke it. I think it's just kind of, it gives me hope that I think there is like a genuine yearning for new stuff, like after like sort of like a decade and a half of like, like Marvel superhero slop and like all these just like kind of like rehashes and all that. It just seemed like people, are craving something new and craving some sort of break from, I guess, the Matrix. And so that does give me some hope.
Well, I think that's a great note to end things on. Sam, thank you so much for doing the show. It's been a fun time.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, take it easy.
Yeah, you too.